Are Christians mistreated in the workplace because of their beliefs? That's the concern of religious groups who have asked a parliamentary inquiry to investigate. The group wants Labour's Harriet Harman, chair of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Human Rights, to make sure religious freedom forms a part of their ongoing inquiry. The news comes amidst concern that discrimination against Christians and other religious groups in the workplace is commonplace. Here to tell me more, I'm delighted to welcome James Somerville-Meikle, Deputy Director of the Catholic Union. James, thank you for coming on again. It's always a pleasure to speak to you. What is your take on the call for this parliamentary inquiry?
Well, as you mentioned, there's this inquiry in Parliament being run by the Joint Committee on Human Rights. That's a cross-party group of MPs and peers, one of only a small number of committees that's cross both houses of Parliament. And they're looking into human rights at work, which is great. So far, the discussions have been on trade union legislation, pay and conditions, all the other kind of workplace rights that you would think about. And those are things that the Catholic Church welcomes a discussion on. The Church has got a proud history when it comes to workers' rights and standing up for fairness and for justice. But we also want to see some more basic, some more fundamental human rights included as part of this inquiry, including freedom of religion, because we know that it's becoming harder for Catholics to be true to their faith at work. A survey that we carried out earlier this year found that 1 in 3 people, 33%, had been disadvantaged in some way at work because of their faith. And this isn't something unique to Catholics. We see it with other Christians as well, other people of faith. So we've put our name to this joint letter, ourselves at the Catholic Union, along with the Christian Institutes and the Evangelical Alliance, to make sure that this most fundamental of human rights, freedom of religion, is not overlooked as part of this inquiry, and indeed is integral to the recommendations and report to government later this year.
Well, I'm glad you're working with the Christian Institute, very good people, and the Evangelical Alliance, but this goes back to what I said in the start of the show, in that I think actually the intolerance towards Christianity that we're seeing in the country will form an alliance amongst small O Orthodox Christians. The faithful masses will come together. So this strength and unity there. But James, would you say it's a fair assessment that other forms of discrimination, such as age, sex, race, for example, are taken more seriously than discrimination due to religious beliefs?
Well, that's certainly something that we found in our survey earlier this year. And as I mentioned in my first remarks, we found that 1 in 3 people had been disadvantaged because of their faith. Now, if you substitute that for any other protected characteristic, disability, age, sexuality, that would be headline news, and we on the mainstream media, and we wouldn't tolerate it. And I suppose, in a way, all that we're calling for is for all of those human rights to be properly upheld across the board. So we're not calling on Parliament or the government to reinvent the wheel here. There is extensive legislation in place recognising and upholding freedom of religion or belief. We want to see that upheld and enforced in the way that other rights are.
And do we have any knowledge of the frequency? Because it seems to me that this is a growing concern. Every week on this show, we have issues of workplace discrimination to discuss, where Christians have been essentially persecuted for their faith. I know in the report there is an example of an NHS chaplaincy, so a hospital chaplain who has received a formal complaint for using the words "God bless." I mean, if you can't expect a chaplain to say "God bless," who can you? So do we have any evidence of the frequency or the increase in this kind of discrimination?
Well, certainly anecdotally, there's lots of evidence to draw on. As you say, you use that quite farcical case of a person in a hospital facing disciplinary action for saying "God bless." There are particular problems in the NHS, it seems, with a sort of pathological closing down of chaplaincy services. In some places, we heard from people who work shifts and 0 hours contracts who find it hard to get work because they can't commit to working on a Sunday, for example. So there's a big body of anecdotal evidence out there. And part of the reason why we want this inquiry in Parliament to take freedom of religion seriously is to use some of the time and the parliamentary resources they've got to actually do a deep dive into this and come up with some more sort of empirical evidence on the problem and some recommendations to government.
Very good. Well, thank you for all of your work in this, James. That was James Somerville-Michael, Deputy Director of the Catholic Union. Thank you for your time today.